Dr. Steinmo, we're continuing our conversation on politics, and you actually wrote a piece recently that you've shared with a number of your friends and colleagues that's literally titled "Trump is not the problem," which I think spits in the face of a lot of the popular discourse at the moment. But it's an interesting piece, and I wanted us to parse through it because we're going to put this recording out also with the release of this article. So anybody that is listening to this now, you can just scroll and you'll be able to read the piece below. But Dr. Steinmo, what was your inspiration for writing this piece? What were you observing?
I'm inspiration. Partly is I'm constantly in arguments with a number of my friends, probably most importantly my wife, who is a classic Trump hater. Like a lot of liberal Democrats, think that Trump is the source of all things evil in American politics. Though she doesn't really think that, but I'm constantly into this discussion with my friends who seem to think that if Trump died of a heart attack, American politics would be fine. And my point is, I'm not arguing that Trump's a good guy or that he's a narcissist or I'm going to vote for him. Quite the opposite. I will work against him. But there's a reason that Donald Trump, the narcissist, the person who's a-religious, who's a rapist, who's a thief, who has been charged with and convicted of numerous crimes, has maybe 30%, maybe 40% of American voters, citizens, who think he should be president. And there's a reason for that. He didn't cause that. My argument is that he is a product of a rather dysfunctional political system.
And this political system is the American political system. So are there particular institutions that you think give rise to this character that we know as Trump?
Well, so I'm an institutionalist, as we've talked about before. I believe institutions matter. Institutions, you can think of institutions, political institutions, as the rules of the game. So our system of checks and balances, which are, to be clear, checks on the popular will. That's the purpose of the checks and balances, to make sure that the majority's wishes are not translated into office as it was designed by the founding fathers. By the way, the founding fathers, 70% of the ones who signed the Constitution were slave owners. The vast majority, not all, but the vast majority made their money in property speculation. They were rich people, and they were very worried about the Shays Rebellion and others. They were worried that average people took seriously the writings of the Declaration of Independence, which meant all people are created equal, no taxation without representation. And they went, holy shit, we didn't mean scum like you would be able to govern. We meant that we should govern along with the British elite, or instead of the British elite. So they set up a series of institutions that were designed to make sure the majority's will wasn't translated into policy. My argument is it works, and people don't like the fact that our political system prevents the majority's will from coming into effect.
Okay. And a lot of people will cite the quote, tyranny by the majority. And they'll say, it's tyranny when the majority is able to be assertive about policy. Do you agree?
You can think that, but that doesn't make you a Democrat. I don't mean Democrat, Republican, right?
Yeah.
A democracy, very simple words, simple understanding of a democracy, is a system in which the majority, that's probably the easiest way to define it, but where the public's will is translated into public policy. And there are lots of different ways of doing them, many, many, many different kinds of political democratic institutions. Ours is particular in that the amount of restraints and checks against the popular will are profound. Nobody would ever write a constitution anything like ours. And indeed, when we wrote the German constitution and the Japanese constitution, we didn't put in all those checks and balances because they're dysfunctional.
Okay. And do you feel that at a certain point, the institutions kind of served the will of the majority, or do you feel this was never the case?
Well, it depends on how you define the majority at one level. The majority of Americans, that is, people living between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean at the time the Constitution was founded, were Native Americans. Absolutely didn't serve their interest. There were about, they think, maybe 30 million Indians when the Europeans came. They were exterminated. So our political system that was designed was one that they tried to put checks and balances on the majority's will. At the same time, they created a strong central leadership in military affairs that would allow them to conquer a nation so that the white Americans would be able to take the land from the Native Americans. And so it served the European immigrants and the Europeans pretty well. Didn't serve Native Americans. It didn't serve African Americans.
And maybe the current reality, this kind of like Trump strawman reality, what you're asserting, like at the end of your piece, which I think you stitched together very well, is that Trump is so popular today because he has something right. And then you go on to say our political system is both anti-democratic and doesn't work very well. Now, for people that are wreathing in their seats and can barely handle this conversation, what is it that you think Trump has right?
It's a system run by elites. I mean, it is. It always was run by elites. If you look throughout American history, the major decisions in American politics have been done for and by elites. The checks and balances creates a system which we now understand as interest group politics, right?
Yeah.
Just imagine if someone were trying to pass a law that the majority of Americans think that no one should go without health care because they can't afford it. More than 60% of Americans have agreed to that proposition since 1948, okay? And yet we don't have that. Why? The American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, the American insurance industries are the richest industries in the world. And our system divides political power in a way which allows highly organized and wealthy groups to have more power than average people.
Sure. So it's almost like we have like two containers in our political body. We have this large group of average people who may have a certain feeling or sentiment towards something. And then we have this very small elite group, but their feelings and sentiments, they actually have the ability to implement them. Whereas like this broad group of citizenry, if you will.
Or block. I think it's the key point. Is that it's difficult to get things passed in the American political system, for sure, right? It's not very difficult to block things. Even when clear majorities for decades want it, you can't, it's difficult to execute them.
Mm-hmm. So the thing that Trump has right in essence is that the elite group has too much control over our political system. Is this the core idea?
I would like to be a little more careful. Yes, and that the sentiment that he draws on is the fact that Americans feel, a large percentage of Americans, not just the right wing, a large percentage of Americans feel that their politicians don't represent them. They represent the special interests. If you're on the right, you think it's the woke left that's a special interest. If you're on the left, you think it's the racist that are or maybe the corporations. It used to be everybody hated the corporations. Now that it's more cultural conflict. Sure. But so what I would like to say is that all political system, any large scale democratic set of institutions has an elite, and ultimately elites will have to make the decisions on behalf of their citizens. But we have a problem in America which goes back to the founding or the Declaration, all men are created equal. We have a political culture which has taught Americans that we're a democracy. And most people think democracy means what I think it means, which is a government that does what the people want.
Sure.
Lots of different ways you can do that. But everybody knows the government's not doing what the people want.
Right.
Right? The majority is getting screwed constantly. Look at inequality in America. The right and the left hate the level of inequality that we see in America. Every time you pass a tax bill, it cuts taxes for the rich and not the poor. Nobody likes that except for those who pay for those elections.
Okay. Now, even let's say that our system is basically expressly illiberal, and the only thing that shaped the Americans' public's perceptions on liberty, freedom, and democracy is propaganda. What governs the political behavior of political actors like Donald Trump, right? Because, we understand where checks and balances is effective, right? But so what governs the behavior of the political actor to prevent them from stepping out of bounds or denying some of these longstanding institutions in ways that can be disruptive?
There is very little that governs Donald Trump's behavior. I think that's pretty clear. This is why so many people hate him so much. That, again, is a part of why I think so many people like him, because they say, this system's broken. It doesn't serve my interests. This son of a bitch is going to tear it down. Good. It doesn't work. The hardest puzzle to figure out in one level are, why could Christians support this guy who's a rapist, a convicted rapist, right? Oh, well, we forgive the man. He is going to do what we want. We'll just tear the system down, which he's announced day one.
Yeah.
And they still are going to support him.
Okay, so even if the system is, we'll just say, rigged to a degree, okay? Does that mean that Trump has no accountability for the additional problems that he's created? Or no responsibility?
Of course not. He has exacerbated the problems. I think he's a brilliant tactician. I don't like his speaking style, but it's a style that speaks to very, very many people. Even though he is a penultimate elite, he inherited millions of dollars, but he somehow is able to rhetorically connect with people common folk or work in a hardware store, and they believe him. Again, I'm not suggesting I like this guy or I want him to be president, but let's assume he had a stroke. Okay. Boom, he's gone. Right. I know lots of people are wishing for both of them to have strokes, he and Biden. But let's assume he has a stroke, and maybe Nikki Haley is elected. Right. Are people going to suddenly start trusting their government? Do you know that only 14% of Americans think that they can trust your government some or most of the time? 14%.
I believe that's a new low.
That is a new low. Well, it's been hovering around there for 5 or 8 years before Trump.
Right. Okay. But so, the second tallest building in Chicago is the Trump Tower, and most high-rises in major cities put the name of the organization at the very top. He actually puts his at the river level. And when you're on Randolph Street, you can see his name and his tower. It's in the center. I mean, you could see it for 10 miles if you wanted to. I see it all the time when I'm walking to the dentist. In a lot of ways, I think that's what American power is it is manufactured. And I think Trump also shows the fragility of our political system There was another political actor that emerged out of Chicago, Barack Obama. And I would say this is what I would say, is that the elites have been highly effective at co-opting the plight of the common man and finding some way to relate to them, even if they don't live or think or maybe didn't grow up in those kinds of environments. Barack Obama had to generate strong ties with the black community in Chicago as an outsider, which is very uncommon in Illinois. Illinois doesn't take well to outsiders in their politics. Look at the Clintons. They were effective in Arkansas, which is still full of Dixiecrat style of political thinking, yet they went to elite law schools. And I tend to agree with you more than maybe some of your colleagues were going to host. I don't think Trump is the problem. I think that, all these politicians for many years have maybe kept it palatable, okay? Trump pushed it past palatable for a lot of people. But also, it's not like he changed the system or created a new system. So why would we be built? Why would our country be built off of these supposed democratic ideals that we imported from European political thinkers and not live up to, liberal democratic values? Like, why would we do it like that?
The Constitution was designed to divide power from so the average citizens couldn't govern themselves. Then you add to that the Bill of Rights, or sometimes thought of as the Holy Commandments, which, in my opinion, should be called what they are, which is slaveholders' rights. Again, my argument is that our Constitution was designed to protect the interests of America's elite way back in 1789. Okay, it's worked very well. And one of the interests of those elites was the expansion of the American polity. They had a common interest, that the northern puritanical types, the middle counties, which was the commercial types, and the southern counties. The one thing they had in common, though they had almost nothing in common economically, morally, politically, was the taking the expansion into the western frontier. They didn't even know how big it was. They just knew there was a lot of land out there that you could grow cotton, grow tobacco, have slaves, or sell to immigrants.
Yeah.
Right? And tens of millions of Europeans came to America. What you needed was a strong government, that is a relatively strong military, to push away the people that lived there. And so that when the Europeans came, they could say, oh, wow, this is fabulous land. It's free. That was free land. That's what they thought of it. They didn't think of stolen land, right? So that contributed, in my view, to this idea embedded in the Declaration of Independence: all men are created equal. Now, I'm not going to criticize them at the moment for not thinking of Native Americans as men or of African Americans as men. But for them, these were people who were often extremely poor peasants, very often had to have their way over here paid by somebody like George Washington. They'd work his land, and he would then give them a piece of land out to the west. For them, for their ideology, they come from highly structured hierarchical systems where the lord and king, and they never own their own land, to a place where they can own their own land. And so this belief in American equality is deepened in American culture. Yeah. So on the one hand, we have this driving force in our culture, which says all men are created equal, with the caveats, and the reality that you could come from nowhere and become a farmer, own your own land. It was amazing. Confusing.
Yeah.
And then have a political system that's supposedly a democracy, which people thought, oh, well, in this country, everybody gets to govern. Well, that's not true.
Yeah, it's confusing. And then you have political actors that are skilled, rhetorically like Donald Trump, and they push the populist button. And remember, we know that Donald Trump is not the first populist in contemporary politics. Bernie Sanders has been one of the most outspoken, and even probably gained more acceptance from the general public. He didn't make people feel unsafe with his style of populist politics.
May I read you something?
Please.
Quote, "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the axe of government to their selfish purposes. Distinctions in society will always exist under every just government. Equality of talents and education of wealth cannot be produced by human institutions. There are no necessary evils in government. The evils exist only in its abuses." I could go on.
Mm-hmm.
That is President Jackson when he vetoed the bank bill in 1832. The quote could come directly from Donald Trump. So this isn't, and I understand he really likes Jackson. He had a picture in his when he was president in Oval Office, I understand. But this theme of Jackson was very much an outsider and ran against the elite, and they were horrified of Jackson. And, many people have heard the story of how when his inauguration, basically his supporters came in and totally trashed the White House. Literally trashed it because they were a bunch of drunk rowdies.
Right.
And it was to the elite, the Jeffersons, etc., that were literally horrified. They thought they had unleashed a nightmare, and in some ways, Jackson's got put back in the box, or his politics got put back in the box with the Civil War. And what happens at the end of the Civil War? The American industrial elite takes over government. And that's the expansion of the railroads, the exploration of the West, the taking over, blah, 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 blah. That was, it was good for the it was good for the American, the immigrants to America, terrible for the people who lived there, of course, and really good for the Rockefellers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, so Trump's not the problem. And
Trump is a problem, but again, if he died of a stroke, would America suddenly have a great political system and everybody trusts our government?
No. And the seeds of populism are sown and spreading.
Yes, that's right. And you didn't raise this question or point, but I would.
Sure.
A very large percentage of Trump's base, the MAGA base today, are former Democrats. And they are the working class. They used to be. But what happened to them, back to the point about elites, is that when Bill Clinton thought he was going to lose his second election, he turned into a Republican.
Yeah.
And passed all kinds of policies, NAFTA, et cetera, end of welfare as we know it, et cetera, which effectively screwed over the white working class of America. So they were kind of at sea for a long time, in my view. Here comes Trump and says, "I know what you're angry about. You're angry about those sons of a bitches. Even the Democrats abandon you."
Yeah, it's sad too, because all my mental models on American politics get shattered every time we talk.
That's my job.
But it's constructive because it makes for much more incisive and accurate analysis. And the reality is that America does have a problem. It extends beyond Donald Trump. And that is something that we need to have a more open conversation about.
Right. But again, I would like to emphasize again, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. But if Donald Trump had a stroke, America wouldn't suddenly become this loved country where people think our political institutions work. We'd still not be able to pass immigration reform or gun laws or get national health insurance or have a fair tax system. One of the things that I did a study a couple of years ago where we were trying to understand attitudes towards public spending and taxation.
Okay.
Large study, 3,000 subjects, etc. And one of the things I learned in that study was that both Democrats and or people who voted for Clinton, Hillary, and who voted for Trump had very similar attitudes towards their belief in inequality. Both thought it was terrible. Both think that the elite is getting away with murder, and both
Okay.
think we should have a system which is more equal than we do. Let me add to that. Do you know that the five richest men in the world earned $5 million a minute since 2020, while people have lost jobs, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
No wonder they're angry.
And like you said, Dr. Steinmo, we have severe coordination challenges when it comes to regulating guns, even though we see shootings in schools and public spaces pretty frequently. But
Yep.
we can pass a stimulus bill in less than a week. But we can't maintain a Speaker of the House. We go
Right.
through impeachment proceedings within moments, but we can't pass a budget. Right? It's pretty shocking.
I didn't really have time to print it out. I have a whole list of like American exceptionalism factoids, all of
Okay.
which the ones I picked out, of course, are really quite shocking. And any reasonable person would think that it's terrible. We have one of the highest levels of inequality, one of the highest levels of death by gun. We're all kinds of the highest level of sickness, et cetera, in the richest country in the history of the world.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to explain the gravity of the amount of wealth that is concentrated amongst these 50 states because people lack the ability to visualize. But let's just say that there is $70 trillion of currency circulating in the world right now. 60% of that is US dollars. I don't know if people really understand like what that means, but and there's a reason, because it's still the most powerful currency on planet Earth, but so much of that money is concentrated here in this country. It's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know what it means. Those are numbers which are, what is it? How does one even get your head around it? Again, we have this conflicting part of our culture, our cultural heritage, which has to do with the frontier and moving west. And, if you didn't do well in Ohio, you moved to Colorado. And if you didn't move to Colorado, you moved to California. And there was always more wealth to be had.
Sure.
And so there is this kind of spirit of individualism and creativity in American culture, which is very real and very much part of our success. The raw physical resources of this country are the best part of the success. Like if you you're less likely to see those attitudes in almost anywhere else, because no one had that amount of rich, free land to take advantage of. But when the immigrant came and their children grew up, the story they told was, oh, my family back in Russia or Germany or whatever, they're still, poor as hell. And look at us, we've got 160 acres. We made it on our own.
Right.
They forget the fact that the Indians who lived there were killed by the government. I don't need government except to kill Indians.
America. It's a picturesque story in many ways when you break it down, Steinmo, because you leave no details out. So I appreciate your perspective, and we'll wrap here. But Trump is not the problem. You've explained it in detail. This will be attached with the actual article, and we're going to have future conversations about this and democracy and many other interesting topics in this vein. So it's great to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. I look forward to more conversations with you. It's always a pleasure, Christopher.
Thank you, Dr. Steinmo.